Okay, microphone. All right. Alrighty, let's do this. All right, so let's begin. Okay, let me see if I can save some laptop battery here. Perfect. That did not go well. If I go forward here, that one's fine. Okay. There we go. All right. Guess that's not going to work. Perfect. Okay. So, yes, the stream just started, so I just got it up a second ago, and we'll kind of go from there. All right, so obviously today we're definitely going to finish up talking about social research will be done. We're going to start talking about culture at some point, and I'm going to try to let you go a few minutes early today because it's Friday, A, and B, I have to be over in Torrey at 1, and I just want to make sure I get there on time. My audio is extremely, oh, yeah, I have the mic turned. It's because of this. Because the room mic is turned up too loud. How's that? Is that better? People who didn't come and expect perfect results? Take that, okay. I don't know. I can very, very quickly check my audio settings, but it's probably going to be what it is. Maybe I'm just not talking loud enough. Nope, okay. I don't know what's going on, but you'll just have to live with it. Sorry. Okay, so I'm going to turn that down a little bit more to cut down the echo. Okay, so we were talking on Wednesday, obviously, about social research and how we do it, and we ended with kind of this slide, right? So we're talking about the 3 things that you need basically to establish cause, right? So you need the relationship test, right? When you check your independent variable, there has to be, when you have the change in the independent variable, there has to be a subsequent change in the dependent variable as well. The sequencing has to be on, right? The dependent variable can't start changing prior to the change in the independent variable, so dependent has to follow independent, or they have to start changing at least at the same time. And non-spuriousness, right? So there can't be a third variable affecting things, right? So basically, right, I said, I think this is where we ended, a spurious relationship happens essentially when there's a third variable causing the change in both the independent and dependent variable. So the classic example of this that's used, to talk about a spurious variable is the example I was giving last time, right? When we talk about something like the fact that when ice cream sales rise, murders also go up, right? So is there a correlation, right? Are higher ice cream sales, does ice cream put people in a really bad mood and therefore they go out and murder people? Obviously not, right? For that case, there's a third variable that's causing the change in both your independent and dependent variable, right? And that's heat, right? When it gets hotter outside, people buy more ice cream. Because they're outside more, because it gets too hot to be inside, they're more outdoors, which means they're interacting with more people, and they're more vulnerable to potentially being murdered, right? So it's a third variable causing the change in both, right? So in that case, you would say that temperature, outdoor temperature, is causing the change in both, right? So the relationship between ice cream sales and rising murder isn't an authentic relationship, it's a spurious relationship. Okay. Yeah, so an authentic relationship occurs when your independent variable changes and then your dependent variable changes at the same time or shortly thereafter, so that that that's causing whatever it is your independent variable is, let's say atmospheric temperature, right, is causing the change in ice cream sales, right? That's an authentic relationship because when the temperature goes up, ice cream sales are going to go up. When it goes down, they're going to go down, right? That's an authentic relationship. Okay. I said this already. I got ahead of myself. Yeah, so a causal connection or correlation occurs when basically the variables systematically change together, right? That's the relationship criterion. When the independent variable changes before the observed change in the dependent variable, the sequencing criteria, and when there's, the relationship is authentic, there's not a spurious variable. So that's how it goes. Okay. So qualitative methods are used by sociologists basically who want to turn social phenomena into some kind of number, right? So, sorry, these both say qualitative. Sorry, my brain is, let me reset that in my brain. Let me talk about qualitative, just qualitative. I started on quantitative, I don't know why I was there. This is qualitative. So, sorry, qualitative. Again, it's about the quality of people's experiences, right? So we talk about qualitative, right? When you want to understand a social phenomenon from the point of view of the people involved in it, right? When you want to get their perspectives, right? So you want to understand how people interpret their own social experiences, you're basically in the realm of the qualitative, right? So again, think about it like this. Quantitative is about turning human experiences into numbers. Qualitative is usually about turning human experiences into words and descriptions, right? So it's inductive in the sense that most of the time, rather than trying to prove a hypothesis or disprove a hypothesis, when you talk about qualitative research, you usually kind of start from the position where you start with a research question and then you go gather your data, right? So you talk to people, understand their experiences, and then you come up with an explanation or a theory as to why things are happening, which we call induction, right? So yeah, it's about understanding social phenomena from the point of view of the actors involved. Forward. Okay. So how do we do this? There's a couple of different ways, a couple of really popular qualitative methodologies. So, sorry, because usually people who trend towards qualitative will tend to be people who struggle with statistics, that sort of thing. But research, okay, so one of them is participant observation, right? Where basically a researcher takes part in a social group, right? Either overtly or covertly. More typically now, we're moving towards overt, where people know that you're there and they know what you're doing. And you make some kind of systematic observations about what's occurring and then try to give your understanding why. Right, okay. So what does this look like in principle, right? That's a lot of, abstract language. So let's say, and I use this example all the time in my intro to methods class, ultimately, let's say you wanted to understand furries, right? So, you know what furries are, right? People who dress up as animals or have, believe that they have some kind of connection or identity that's an animal, and you want to understand why furries are the way they are, what the appeal of a fursona is for, sorry, I've learned the lingo over the years, but I promise you I'm not a furry. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I'm not, just FYI. Okay, so, right, you want to know why people have a furry identity, a fursona. Why, don't giggle, it makes me giggle. So yeah, they have this personality that they have. Why did they choose that? Why is it meaningful to them, right? One of the things you could do is you could go and do a participant observation, right? So you know where the furries gather, and you go and you gather amongst the furries, right? So at the Edmonton Furry Convention, right, you get together with other furries. Either if you want to do it from a pure covert point of view, you get yourself a furry suit and you dress as Snowball, the cat, right, and you go and experience this. Or, right, you could go in, if you want to be overt about it, you go in there, dressed however you want to dress, and you have a tag that says researcher, and anyone you talk to, you hand them a consent form, right? Lots of different possible ways of doing this type of research. But, you would go and kind of experience things with them and then describe what you're seeing, right? One of the ways you would do this is write field notes, right? So you would be like, okay, at 7:15, observed an interaction between Snowball the cat and Wanda the skunk. It went as follows, and that's, the kind of thing you would do, right? So you might include interviews in it eventually as well. So participant observations, have the following issues. So determining the researcher's role, right? What role are you going to take so that you have the minimal impact possible on the social environment that you're in, right? What you want to avoid is what's called reactivity, right? This is where people start to act differently than they normally would because they know they're being observed, right? Like, you know, you have reactivity in your everyday life, right? You know, when you're trying to take a picture of a group of friends, and one of your friends, you know, starts making bunny ears on the other people or starts making funny faces and goofing off, that's reactivity. And what you know, basically they're acting funny because they know they're being observed, however, are going to be a lot harder. Or, you know, spaces where, you know, there's some kind of gatekeeper, right? So, you know, if you wanted to do research, say, on a gang, right? You're super interested in youth gangs. Okay, it's not like you can just walk off the street, you know, walk onto the street. What's the experience of female engineers working in major engineering firms, right? You got to get access to that particular space. So gaining access is important, right? Identifying key informants. Who is the most important person? Might not benefit you to talk to every single person, right? So who are going to be the people who know the things you want to know? You got to figure that out. And then the last two, right? Assembling field notes, right? So typically we make notes about what's going on in our research, specifically so that we don't forget and that we don't remember things wrong later, right? Because your memory is very malleable, and sometimes, you know, there might be a tendency for researchers to remember things in such a way as supports their theory, so field notes end up being really important. And then, you know, constructing the narrative, what's the story of the research you found? You know, that's the writing it up in a dissertation or journal article. Okay. Well, you know where there isn't an audio problem? In the room. I'll attempt one thing, and if it doesn't work, then I'm sorry, you're on your own. I'll try turning down this microphone, way down, and then, okay, I can't blow out the speaker now. I'll try turning it way down. I don't know what's going on. Okay, I've now tried to fix the audio problem for the second time. Your next option is leave and come to school. Okay. Clear. If I could be an animal, which animal would I be? That's a weird question. Perfect for a Friday. Now you can't. Fine. You can't always get what you want, friends. Okay. Now we're right on the edge of yellow. So this is all I got for you, friends. That's all I got. Okay, if I could be an animal, which animal would I be? Which is the coolest? You know what? Red panda. They sleep a lot. I like it. Okay, and they look kind of cute. Okay, what is an inductive approach? Okay, super easy, right? Think inductive approach is you start with a theory, and then you move to collecting. You start without a theory. You go to. So you start without a theory, right? You just go out and collect data, and then from the data you have, you then basically go and create a theory, right? So you get data first, you go from data to theory in induction, right? As opposed to trying to prove a hypothesis, so theory to data in deduction. Okay. All right, well, I've apparently fixed the audio. Okay, so this is, when we talk about qualitative research, the number one tool that we use is interviewing. And there's a few different types of interviews, but in qualitative research, we do a lot of interviewing, right? So the first type is structured interviews. These are pretty rare in qualitative research, but they do happen, where basically, you know, in a structured interview, you would ask people questions in a script with no particular way for the person asking the questions to deviate, right? So if I had no matter what you said, if I was talking to you in a structured interview, I don't ask any follow-up questions that aren't on the script. I just ask the questions and move on. Sometimes people do this kind of qualitative stuff, like in phone interviews, where you're paying a company to do it, and they just follow a script, right? So that's a structured interview. The more typical ones are semi-structured interviews, where basically you start with a basic list of questions, and then like a conversation with a person would evolve naturally, you essentially follow things down the rabbit hole, right? Where basically it's like, okay, they say something interesting, and instead of asking the next question on your script, you say, oh, that's interesting. Could you tell me more about that, right? That's a semi-structured interview. Now, an unstructured interview, again, pretty rare. I don't know why you would ever do an unstructured interview, is you come in with no script, no presuppositions, and you just, you know, start asking questions. All righty. Okay, so cases and case studies, like typically when we're doing qualitative research, people end up talking about cases and case studies, right? So a case can be just about anything, right? So when you talk about a case, right, basically anything, like a person can be a case, a group can be a case, this classroom could be a case, the University of Alberta could be a case, the province of Alberta could be a case, the city of Edmonton could be a case, you know, Canada could be a case. Almost anything can be a case that you look at, right? So basically, it is any kind of unit of society that you do in-depth research and observation of, right? And that can be a case, right? So it can go right from the microest thing, right, a single person, all the way up to countries, right? And you can look at them. Now, when you write it up, right? So when you write your rich description of this, you know, of this case that you spent a whole bunch of time studying, that is called a case study, right? Your description of it. So, like for example, when I was doing my PhD research, I was doing it on Russian television. And if you look at my dissertation, which I highly recommend you do not do because it's super dull, I feel, anyway, it's like my fourth child, but I ultimately kind of hate it too. Like my first, no, I'm kidding. I love my kids, don't get me wrong. But you know, I have basically 6 Russian television networks that I talk about in the dissertation, right? And those are, each of them is a case, and my description of them is a case study, right? So that's what it kind of looks like, right? So if you were looking at, you know, I don't know, you're doing research on a prison in Alberta, right? And you go to Edmonton Remand Center, that could be your case, right? And when you write your detailed description of it, that's your case study. Okay, I think that's it. All right, I will go back. I think are you doing this on purpose? I'm gonna try to turn up the mic. I can speak louder, of course. Breathe deep. Everything's fun today. My laptop battery, my son decided to unplug my laptop so he could plug his in to play Rocket League, and then like took my charger out of my bag. So my battery's limping along at like 14%. It's just one of those days. Okay. In terms of cases, why would it only include insiders and not outsiders? I mean, you could study a case in any way you want, right? Like, if you wanted to look at, you know, I mean, it makes more sense to look at, like, groups internally. So if you're looking at, say, like a church, you would study the people in the church. Studying people outside of it wouldn't make a lot of sense, though you could frame it in all sorts of ways. But generally, when you're talking about cases, you're talking about, you know, people who know something, and outsiders typically don't know anything about your cases, so, okay. All right. Sad to say, I do have other slides for today. I'm sorry. I know it's Friday, but I do want to start on culture. Okay. And a new Slido for you. Sorry, you have to switch midstream. I'll leave it there for a second for you to get a grip on it here. Okay. So, culture. There is a chance, like, I'm not sure, I gotta see how we do on Monday, but a chance this might be our last unit before the exam. We'll see. Okay. Oops, I forgot to reset the slides. I forgot to reset the Slido, which I will do now, because I'm sure you didn't all ask questions in like 5 minutes. Okay. I used the same slides from last term with the same Slido. So, wow, my screen is so dark I can barely see. Okay. Come alive, my friend. All right, let's do it. So yeah, same Slido, 3365293, fun. Okay, so culture, right? When we talk about culture, in a sociological sense, when we talk about culture, we generally mean, right, the way, we use it in a way, it's how people organize like social communication, right? Culture is really a tool set where we ultimately organize social communication, right? So a culture generally, this is a very sociological definition, is symbols and their definitions that people use to solve real life problems, right? So when we think about cultures, there's a little bit of overlap with anthropology here, right? Specific cultures develop in specific ways because each specific culture ultimately faces different challenges, right? And so they develop different kinds of tools, communications, language, symbols to solve particular problems of their place and time, right? So yeah, basically culture allows human beings to do what human beings really need to do, which is cooperate, right? Human beings in a lot of ways are not particularly imposing animals, right? You don't have great teeth, you don't have great claws, except some of you ladies that have those stick-on ones, and I don't know how you use your cell phones. But aside from that, right, most of those break pretty easily. But I guess gentlemen could have those too, I suppose. Don't want to be exclusive. But generally speaking, we're not that imposing. The one thing we have that's really useful to us is our brains, right? And so we use culture to kind of solve problems. And problems tend to persist in kind of places for a long time, so we tend to have pretty useful systems that evolve long term to solve the problems that societies are facing, right? Okay, and sometimes, when we talk about, culture in terms of things like music, language, entertainment in other ways, right? We sometimes split culture into kind of the categories of high culture, right? So the cultures of the elites, and kind of popular culture, the culture that's more shared in society. And certainly if we get to talking about mass media towards the end of the course, that distinction matters a whole lot. Okay, so symbols, like what are symbols? Basically concrete things or abstract terms that represent something else, right? And culture is composed of symbols whose meanings are shared amongst a bunch of people. Now, basically, when we talk about symbols, right, in terms of abstract ways of representing, so it can be anything, words are these kinds of symbols, right? And they allow human beings basically to communicate with other human beings things that they haven't, that one person's experienced and another person hasn't, right? So if you are, living on the, in the woods of Alberta, right, and you need to communicate to another person that there are these large brown animals that will kill you, right? You come up with the word bear and you explain to a person what the definition of bear is, large carnivore that will kill you. And then without ever experiencing a bear, right, you never have to actually see one in person. If you ever run into one in the woods, you'll be like, huh, that roughly fits the definition of a bear, and I should stay the heck away from that thing, right? And culture is composed of, basic symbols, like just basic words, and complex, symbols whose meanings are shared among a substantial number of people. And here you can think of something like, to help organize people into national communities, right, that are moved towards a common goal, the goals of whatever nation state you're in, right? So think of how Canada, kind of thinks of itself, and what are some of the prominent symbols that are shared amongst a whole bunch of people, right? So obviously something like the Canadian flag, right, would be a kind of shared symbol that's organized to give us all an identity, right? We're all supposed to have some kind of identity that's represented by that flag, and we're all supposed to feel certain feelings, right? And then the, Terry Fox and all of, you could think of a million Canadian symbols. If anyone says Tim Hortons, shame on you. It's terrible coffee and terrible donuts. Yeah, I went there. I hate Tim Hortons. They're bad. Someone gave me a Tim Hortons gift card. It's still in my backpack. It's been 3 years. Maybe I'll give it away as a prize someday. Anyway, unless Tim Hortons has robbed me and taken my gift card money, which I neither wanted nor will ever use. Anyway, Tim Hortons, it could be a kind of shared national symbol or whatever, right? The Americans have, the beaver, all of these sorts of things, Hockey Night in Canada, all of these things are kind of shared symbols that are supposed to help Canadians kind of get together and have a shared identity and move towards common purposes, right? So you can go from the very tangible bear to the very, imagined, something like, a country. Okay. So, human beings essentially have three kind of tools for human survival, right, that they can use, right? So, abstraction, right? Basically what I was talking about when I talked about symbols, right? When you can come up with a word for bear that explains, what a bear is without someone having to actually experience it, so that when they do, they know what to do. That is abstraction, right? So basically, general concepts that are meaningfully organize concrete experiences, right? So that you can tell other people, you can explain to someone how to fix a motor, right? All of these things are based on abstraction, right? Okay, one other form of abstraction, right? Beliefs, which are statements about what members of a community define as real. And this can be things like religious beliefs, right? So certainly a belief in God or a belief in whatever, right? Are all essentially beliefs, but it could be something like the idea that, everybody in this room, right, who lives in Edmonton today, and, John, who lives, the imaginary person, John Smith, who lives in Newfoundland, that we all share something that makes us all Canadian, right? This kind of imagined link with each other through this notion of Canada. That's a belief, right? That Canada exists in these borders, right? And that everybody who is within its borders is essentially Canadian in some way. That's a belief as well, right? And you can do that. Everybody who's in Alberta is Albertan. These are all beliefs that are supposed to tell us what's real, right? What matters. Okay, cooperation. Like I said, human beings are pretty terrible on their own. We're not actually that imposing. Other animals would eat us rather happily if they had the chance. And if you don't believe me, go talk to a polar bear. Not recommended. There's this terrifying video where this British journalist sits inside this like plexiglass pod to observe the polar bears, and this one polar bear comes and is like trying to smash the pod to get inside, and it's like, yeah, that guy would eat you. 100%. So what do humans do? We cooperate, right? We have a capacity for cooperation that allows us to survive and thrive in the world, right? And partially we do this by creating norms and values. And we'll talk about norms and values when we get a little further. Okay, and then production, we have the capacity to make stuff, right? Thank you, opposable thumb. We have the ability to produce, tools and structures and all sorts of things that improve, and food that improves our ability to take what we want from nature, right? All the way from, a hammer or a shovel or a stick, right? All the way to, the giant cranes you use to build skyscrapers. These are all, production, and your clothing, right? These are all things that we are basically make to make our lives easier and to help us survive in nature. Okay. I think I'm out of tea. Class must end. I'm out of tea. I'm kidding. All right, so don't pack up. So we can split culture into kind of two categories. Non-material culture, right? So these are symbols, norms, and other intangible elements. And, material culture, tools and techniques which allow people to get stuff done. Do I have a slide? Oh, I don't. I had a slide before that had more stuff on it. Okay, so what do we think of as non-material culture, right? So, language would be the chief one in non-material culture, right? Other kinds of symbolic representations of the world, stories, right, epics, are all essentially non-material culture. Material culture, right, basically anything that allows us to get tasks accomplished or survive in the world. So clothing, right, tools, buildings, these are all parts of material culture. Non-material culture could include things like religion, even things like recipes, right, and food are all parts of material culture, in that case, because they allow us to extract more nutrients from the world around us. Okay. I have a question. I hate Tim Hortons. I remember one time, these people love Tim Hortons, they're walking out on me. No, I'm kidding. That's fine. I'm joking. I didn't mean to point you out. I went for the joke at the expense of the person. I do remember going to Tim Hortons, and it was like in a Walmart, because I needed to eat something, and I had one of their sandwiches, and then like 5 minutes later, I was overwhelmingly thirsty, because I had to buy like a Gatorade at Walmart. Why? Because there's so much damn salt in their food. It's basically inedible. I hate it so much. Anyway, so Tim Hortons, I hate them. So Social organization, right? Basically, we organize culture in such a way as so everybody essentially knows what to do, right? And we have all of these kind of cultural blueprints, or what Smith calls cultural scripts, right? So basically, the way that you act in the world a lot of the times is organized along kind of cultural scripts that tell you what to do in certain circumstances, right? And this helps community members get along with each other. It helps community members kind of understand the world and what they're supposed to do. And again, cultural scripts or cultural kind of social organization, cultural blueprints are important, like right from, you know, kind of the micro level, you know, how you interact with people and what do. You know, so like if you bump into someone on the subway or in the LRT, what do? Right? Do you apologize, right? If the train is packed, is it too, you know, do you just push in and kind of force your way in? Or do you wait for the next train, right? This is kind of a social blueprint at a small level, right? What do you do in your normal life, right? You know, if someone cuts in line in front of you at Tim Hortons, what do? Leave. No, sorry, I'm kidding. You should have done that in the first place. Going for the callback there. You know, so these are like cultural blueprints at a small level. Now, I mean, if you don't believe me, you know, go get on the LRT here and then fly to like Tokyo and like try to get on the train there, and you'll notice there's a different cultural blueprint that says what you're allowed to do. So at the very small level, now it actually happens at the macro level as well, right? Like, we have all sorts of cultural scripts that tell us, like, what are you supposed to do as a young adult? You know, do you go to college? Do you go to the workforce? When are you supposed to have children? When are you supposed to get married? You know, there's a lot of cultural scripts that differ, you know, from society to society. And understanding them, right, interpreting them, putting the blueprints into coordinated action basically helps us all get along, right? Based on kind of shared norms and values. Okay, I know, I'm just being silly. Also, that's disgusting. But aside from that, okay. Yeah, I mean, so this is a little chart from the textbook adapted from Robert Bursteed, The Social Order, right? So basically, you know, how does culture kind of work, right? We have our abstraction, our cooperation, and our production. How would it work, say, in a real-world example in medicine, right? So basically, you have beliefs, theories about how a certain drug might work. That is a belief as well. You know, cooperation, you know, basically you do experiments following certain norms of how you're supposed to do experiments to see if the drug works, and then you create it, you know, material culture and social organization, right? You put it out there as a treatment, you develop it, you produce it, and then you tell doctors how they're supposed to use it and prescribe it, right? And then and they do so, at least in theory. All right, so this is the fun one. All right, well, maybe we'll do this, and we'll stop there, because it's always a good place to stop after this one. There's a bit to digest here. So, in terms of norms, right? Every society has norms, which are basically kind of rules of what's allowed and what's not allowed. Now, generally in sociology, we split rules into 4 categories, right? So we have folkways, mores, that's how it's pronounced, taboos, and laws, right? So, and each of these, you can kind of define what each of them is by the severity of the social response when one of them is violated, right? So when we're talking about the least important level of norm is what we call a folkway, right? And basically it's anything that is seen as, so I have it on my little chart here, right, as right versus rude, right? So what is it rude to do? Okay. So, a folkway is basically navigating manners and proper conduct in really low stakes kind of ways, right? So, if we talk about, you know, something pretty simple, right? What if you know, say a bad word, an impolite word at the family dinner table when your grandma's there, right? You're probably going to end up on the back end of a folkway where your mom or someone else, or maybe your grandma, is going to tell you that you're being rude and to stop it, right? Or, you know, maybe your grandma, if she's like my grandma, she hits you on the back of the head. My grandma was very violent. She came, I mean, she was born in like 1922, so she came from a different era, and had no compunction about giving me a whack if she thought I was being rude. Lovely lady. She's dead now. All right. No, they're not connected. Okay, so that's folkways, right? Right versus rude, right? If you try to shove onto the train, right, you're going to get the glares of people. If you fail to, there's a pregnant lady on the LRT and you're there sitting in your chair, fit young person that you are, you look at her and you're like, and you don't get up and give her your seat, right? And then someone on the train is like, excuse me, young person, you need to get up and give that lady your seat. That's a folkway, right? They've judged that you've acted in some way that is rude, or you're violating some kind of very low-level social norm. Are you going to face some kind of social backlash for it? Yes. Is it going to be severe? No. Right? And it can be as much as like someone glares at you, right? People, you dye your hair fluorescent pink, and the ladies at your religious congregation start looking at you funny. You're on the weird side of a folkway there. Okay, so mores. Mores are more severe, right? So mores are typically kind of core things that a society considers to be essential for this, for basic social order. So yeah, right versus wrong. Now, in a lot of cases, and in most cases, when you violate a more, you're going to end up facing some type of institutional correction. Okay, for instance, a really important value, say in university and in society in general, would be the meritocracy, right? A norm. Is that we operate on a meritocracy. And that basically the smartest people, right, the most capable and the hardest working get ahead. Whatever you think of that idea, that's sort of a base assumption of say, Canadian society. So, if you are in a university classroom, right, we say we get to our first exam in SOC 100, and you decide to cheat, right? What you're doing there is violating what's seen as an important value. Because if you get good grades that you didn't deserve, right, how will we know who the smart people are that we should give the scholarships to and, promote and let into grad school and basically move along the chain, right? If we don't have the meritocracy, in a sense, we don't really know who the smart people are. So if you violate, right, if you get caught cheating, right, you're going to face some type of institutional backlash, right? You might get expelled or you might get a 0 on the entire exam, but there's basically an institutional structure that comes in. Now, it doesn't always, and where it's different from, say, a law, is it isn't always enforced by the state, right? You might run afoul of your religious community and you get, shunned, right? That's a sort of more, or kicked out of the congregation, right? You have to meet with the pastor or priest or, imam or whatever, and you have to, you basically, right, you're then given some kind of institutional punishment, right? You did something bad in high school, you got called to the principal's office, right? You got into a fight in high school, you got suspended, you violated a more. Again, you're not necessarily dealing with the state, but there's an institutional aspect. Now, it can also include laws, right? A violation of mores can ultimately bring in law enforcement. So something can be both, a more and a law, right? So keep that in mind. Like a law is just norms that are codified and enforced by the state, and a more can also, be a law. They're not mutually exclusive categories. So, a law is something right versus something that is illegal, right? So if you, rob a bank, right? You're both violating a more and breaking a law, right? And you're going to face, in this case, the institutional punishment of the state. Okay, the last one, or I said laws, I got them out of order, is taboos, right? Taboos are the strongest norms, and they tend to cause revulsion when they are violated, right? So the chart there has it as right versus forbidden. So, and you typically know, now, again, the consequences of violating a taboo are always institutional. They almost always violate laws, and in the cases where they don't, right, there's other institutional actors that sort of step in. So they always have an institutional aspect as well. But you violated a taboo, right, when people get grossed out by it. So think of like, pedophilia, right? Pedophilia, you know, adults who are attracted to or have sex with children, right, in Western society anyway, is a taboo, right? If people hear that, you know, you did that, you're going to face revulsion. Like, people are going to think you are the most disgusting individual ever, you know, ever to appear, right? And you will face institutional sanction, right? Because you violated a taboo, right? If I stood up here and I started spouting the N-word, right, I would have violated a taboo. And what inevitably would happen is that, you know, in that case, I wouldn't have, you know, violated the law, but I would clearly get fired, right? There would be an institutional aspect to it as well. So they're the strongest norms, and when you know when you've crossed it, right? If you start making out with your sister, you've entered the realm of the taboo. Sorry. You know, it's not gonna go well. You know, all right, why don't we leave it there? And we'll see you all on Monday. There's probably questions. I'll pick that up on Monday. All right.